Hey guys, how are all of you beautiful people? Hope all of you are doing great. This is next part of What If Naruto Repeat Chunin Exam, where Naruto finds he is flung back in time and must repeat the entire Chunin exam over and over and over, until he gets it right and possibly saves Konoha in the bargain. So let's start without any delay. The flow of patients had lifted somewhat as the battle switched to a higher gear, with most of those unable to participate in a giant summons battle taking cover and shelter as far away from that fight as possible. Still, all things had kind of blended into a medical haze when Tamrai got handed yet another patient in what seemed an unending stream of them. Something about this one shook her out of her hard-working stupor. "Hey, Shitsune. Have you ever seen a smaller willy?" She held the object up between two fingers, having had her attention directed to the object as it was so near the wounded area which had been presented to her by a nurse. The Sunin's apprentice looked over, and blinked. "No. Not in all my years of medical experience." "Well, I've seen 3-year-olds packing more meat. In fact, I think I've delivered newborns with as much she was being, as was the habit of women, extremely frank talking over naughty subjects when it was just the girls present. Comatose patients didn't count. Yeah. Look at it. One of the knuckles on my middle finger is bigger. It's like a tiny grain of rice." Tamrai giggled naughtily. "Whose is it?" Shitsune asked. Both women leaned over to look at the face, then relaxed with bored expressions. "Well, that explains it." Shitsune dismissed the subject. Tamrai nodded. "Yeah. Really, it's what you'd expect, frankly." Sasuke groaned in his enforced slumber. The storm was a mess. Anyone going out in it would find their eyes instantly filled with grit and dust. It was like opening them underwater and expecting them not to get wet. There was that much sand in the air. From their shelter in a ruined hut, Naruto was scowling out into it. "Still thinking you should have seen this coming?" Anko teased, then huffed. "You couldn't, not unless you want to spook at every cloud in the sky, every drop of rain, every falling leaf, and every ray of sunshine. Weather happens, kid. You can't spook at every breeze. It just happens that breeze is out on a desert pick up sand. You could no more have anticipated this sandstorm was an attack than you could stop it from happening in the first place." Her husband shook his head. "No, that's not it at all. I can accept that. You made your point earlier, and I believe it." Then he grinned. "Now I was just thinking of how to rejoin combat." His wife looked back down to his feet, which gaps in the bandages revealed were still ground up like hamburger. Clones of his were busy applying medical techniques to both his feet and her wounds, but it was slow going, as damage was quite extensive in both cases. "Ah, Naruto. You aren't fighting until you can stand without assistance." But he answered her with a foxy grin that said otherwise. They were taking shelter fairly far from the manor house, but there were a number of empty or ruined examples of his submerged stone huts nearby, and he knew where those were, having created them. Naruto formed a seal, showing how tired he was, as he typically had no need of them for his frequently used techniques, to create a few hundred shadow clones, filling those empty or ruined buildings nearby. Then they all went to work using crafting jutsu he'd invented to help out in his various trade skills to build themselves a small army of puppets. Boulder aggregation, as used by Iam to turn sand to stone for the resort, was instead used to form limbs and bodies, spears and armor. Techniques Naruto had created for drawing metal out of the earth to supply his forges functioned surprisingly well out here, providing him with material for joints, and to strengthen and reinforce the puppets' bodies, armor and weapons. Puppet use was not an art he'd developed as much as some others, but he had learned how to use puppet techniques from Kankuro, who was a master. Using a clone army under shelter to control them, it was no issue to have an equal number of puppets under his command, and puppets were not subject to the same kind of damage issues as his clones, so they could operate out in that storm. So Naruto sent his puppet army out into the battle, reactivating their white eyes so he could follow them, and inadvertently rediscovering how Sunsight had led Suna to better puppet techniques, as the puppet masters could hide better, an initial advantage they had expanded on greatly in the years since. The puppets were jerky, it was not something he'd practiced much, but in the conditions of conflict which had so far prevailed, they were near-perfect grunt soldiers. Their stone feet and bodies couldn't care less about needles of razor-sharp glass in the sands. Their metal joints were robust and simple enough not to clog in the omnipresent dust. Their controllers could see through the fog of powder with their variant of the Hyuga bloodline, and the tide of the small ninja battles began to turn in Konoha's favor as these extra soldiers went out, as their small weight made an enormous difference. Naruto grinned, and suddenly his puppet army shimmered, as basic clones of the puppets intermingled with those puppets, to deny an enemy an easy idea of which were real and to avoid, or could be harmed. Just like he'd practiced with his shadow clones. Manda brought down one of his coils onto a group of Naruto's puppets, only to discover the 50 long spears held by those puppets driven through his scaly hide by the force of his own strength brought down on them. The snake shrieked at the unexpected injury, and the puppets got up again, having failed to be smashed in the deep, soft sands. Ino and Hinata stood fighting back to back against long odds, as one of the few perimeter defense forces of the now ruined manor that could venture out any distance at all from those walls. Their eyes were both closed, to keep out blowing sand, but their special vision was also active, so it didn't matter, as they could see through their own eyelids. A puppet lunged at Hinata, only to get blown away by a fireball. Lightning was unreliable in this atmosphere, as it kept getting diverted by clouds of metal dust to drain away harmlessly into the ground. "Well, at least we've settled the age-old question," Ino joked to her friend, ducking a wind blade that had nearly cut off her head and replying with a pressure bullet. "Lightning is actually quite weak against Earth. If this were a lightning storm I could still throw around dirt techniques no problem. But here we are in a sandstorm, and I can't get a thunderlance, thunder punch, lightning whip, or even our electrical aura armor to stay up even a second." Wires exploded out of the ground, trying to entrap and entangle the girls, who both dodged separate directions. Hinata responded by launching a phoenix flower technique off into the dust after the ninja who were hunting them. The multiple balls of fire, concealing shuriken, for a surprise secondary attack, were actually a distraction. They pulled attention away from the fact that Hinata had slipped underground and left an illusionary clone behind her. It allowed her to get close enough to a group of their attackers to spring forth out of the ground, shouting, "Dango stick fu!" and pepper them with the sharp wooden candy skewers, the points of all of which had been rolled in mushroom poisons able to kill Naruto himself. A full dozen of their attackers dropped dead in that instant. Ino's body flickered into cover Hinata's back before the last bodies had even fallen. It was dangerous out there, and they liked to keep their attackers at a distance. It was a departure from their usual fighting style, but conditions were bad for the close fighting stuff. The wind constantly played with their whiskers, triggering those so often with fake signals that any real warning got drowned out in the fog of useless ones. So that precious resource was denied them. Similarly, wind was loud, and the howling of it drowned out most other noises, rendering their sensory advantage slim indeed. Ino and Hinata were both excellent close combat fighters, but they relied too heavily on advantages that no longer applied here. That left them to rely on the strength of their young bodies as much as anything, and that had been unchanged from the moment of the first resets. The extra strength and speed their bloodline granted was the only thing making them contestants in a close-up fight. So, once again, it was wise to keep their opponents at a distance, when they could. The girls looked up in disbelief at the jumps made by a quartet of sand ninja. Now ninja normally jumped high and far, but these were unbelievable, and the course they were on for landing would drop the falling chunks of armor and muscle atop those girls. They sprang out of the way themselves, rolling to get better positions. Great Ino joked, drawing her swords and seeing the wicked, serrated edges of the sickles their opponents standing up out of the impact craters wielded double, one in each hand. Close combat types. Might we have the pleasure of knowing your names? We are Mantis Clan, the lead of the four stated. Well, that explains the green body armor, I guess. Ino shrugged playfully. Out in the summons battle zone, Manda had the slug boss Katsuyu in its coils, for the second time at least, Katsuyu having escaped once already. Now neither Naruto, nor his clones, which were exact physical copies of him, could stand due to recent wounds. However, that did not prevent him from drawing on more earth jutsu to expand their recently collapsed shelter into something with a bit more room, and tons of arrow slits. Arrow slits, with more new shadow clones behind them. Clones who unsealed bows out of storage scrolls, and fired off a hail of wire-guided arrows in a swarm at the presently stalemate giant beasts. The scale of boss summons were so huge their eyes were as tall as a man. It was easy, at that scale, to ignore small things as immaterial. Manda had a hide thicker than most swords were long. The snake had little to fear from most human threats. The sandstorm was also blocking its vision, but at its size, those grains of sand were merely dust that had no abrasive power, just an irritant dealt with normally by a slight watering of the eyes. So the giant serpent summon did not see, or care to see, the swarm of tiny arrows approach until it was already too late, and hundreds had sunk into each of the animal's two eyes, rupturing them to gush forth black fluid and permanently blind the creature. Manda, unable to see and thrashing about in pain from its injury, did not see to dodge Katsuyu's acid of 1000 fangs technique, and the spray hit to start dissolving scales and the flesh underneath. Orochimaru, who had until now been observing this fight with some degree of vengeful satisfaction, uncrossed his arms to stare at his summon. Opening his mouth to give orders, he got cut off by a giant head coming out of the spraying grit and biting through Manda's neck. Eyes followed the giant reptilian attacker back from where it had just slain his serpent to an equally giant tortoise shell, upon which stood Guy and Lee. The ninjas' feet were heavily bandaged, but they stood proud, arms crossed and wearing goggles they'd found somewhere as the tortoise boss summon they stood on bit down further and decapitated Manda. Guy actually had the nerve to laugh. Ha ha ha. Orochimaru. I sought out this summon to defeat yours. A tortoise's shell is impervious to the bite of all serpents. And their snapping jaws are equally quick. The Jonin posed to point at the traitor. You can only fail against the might of Konoha. Lee shouted, raising a fist skyward, we are in the springtime of our youth. Tsunade palmed her face. How many times had that Jonin kept back that vital summon while Orochimaru ravaged Konoha? She didn't know if she should blame the Jonin for believing too much in the will of fire triumphing without it, or his desire to shield Lee's dreams of becoming a great ninja without chakra by not using any special techniques around him. But it was probably both. They'd have to cure Lee's chakra coils more often just so the Jonin would use his summon more often. Then a giant scorpion, easily as large as the boss turtle, appeared, with a sand Jonin wearing red armor standing in between the creature's eyes. A scowling Orochimaru also summoned 4 more giant snakes. None were as large or formidable as Manda had been, but they were enough to counter Katsuyu, as the slug summon was already tiring from its injuries, and nearly dried out by the moisture-sucking winds. The sand shinobi were almost as tired and worn down by this fighting as the ones from Leaf. There weren't a great many who still had usable amounts of fight left in them. Then again, the ones from Leaf had, by and large, fared no better. If anything, the damage taken by Konoha shinobi had been worse. Yugao and Hana had been better prepared than most for this conflict, and had borne the brunt of more than their share of it. "We're getting our tails handed to us," Yugao shouted over the winds, as she helped the other angel move towards shelter. The fight had gone out of Hana. Even her dogs were worried about her. Hana's cheeks, moist from crying, now had sand particles stuck to them covering her facial tattoos. "I know." Yugao ventured a shrug. "Still, one can't be too surprised by that. After all, how often do we get to do any sort of fighting against a force that we haven't catalogued fairly well by now, this far into the resets?" The Anbu tried a laugh. "I guess I would be worried if that weren't the case. But I guess we are getting a chance to see that there are some holes in our training that still need work." Hana's eyes widened. "Look out!" she shouted. The two-body flickered to safety right before Manda's corpse came crashing down on top of where they'd been. Neji was stationed among the outer guards for the ruined manor that provided what shelter there was for the pathetic remnants of the Konoha peace envoy, using his activated bloodline to stare out through the walls to watch for approaching danger. The boy was also deeply confused. It was his peculiar job on this mission to watch over Hinata, and he had done so. But he was increasingly confused about how to react to his weak cousin. Because the Hinata he saw out there was anything but weak. He watched as she used wires and smoke bombs, something that he, himself, would not have thought of, as sight was already largely occluded for those not of his bloodline. However, the sand shinobi could evidently see through the dust, but could not see through her smoke. Thus, in the moments before the wind whipped it away, she could disguise her actions from them with it. It was, he reflected quite grudgingly, a stroke of genius, to subdue an enemy several times her own size and send him careening over to the ruined manor, where the Konoha ninja guards could take care of finishing him. Which they did with gusto, eager for some measure of revenge. She next produced a long chain and proceeded to fight with it, deflecting the sickles of 2 opponents until one grasped her chain and tore it from her, whereupon Hinata's body flickered away, and a subsequent explosion revealed that her weapon had been covered in explosive tags, which she detonated at a distance, and as trap for the one who disarmed her. These were not the acts of a weakling. No, Neji reflected quite soberly. They were instead the acts of a strong ninja. The question then became, what had happened to Hinata? If he did not see her with his own illusion-penetrating eyes, he could not have believed it was her. So, what had triggered this change? What's left? Ino shouted over the force of the storm, as her hand came up empty from her ammo pouch. Throwing kunai trailing explosive tags had been their best bet and mainstay for the past little while. Hinata was shaking her head. "I'm out. And nearly out of chakra. Let's fall back," Ino suggested, before jumping up out of the way of one of the 2 remaining mantis fighters. "These guys are just too fast for their size. They're built like houses and move like vipers." Suddenly a chain came flying out and wrapped around the blonde's ankle. The girl barely had time to look up to see the mantis who had snagged her lifting his sickle high in the other to secure her dead. Mind forward/body transfer. She called out after forming a swift hand seal. The sickle had come down and lodged in her belt buckle, just barely scraping the skin of Ino's body before her mind, now in command of the mantis guy, was able to stop the downward force of the blow. Luckily, she'd shown enough mastery of the basic version for her family to finally show her a faster one. The body Ino controlled then whipped around and lodged its sickle into the back and spine of the other remaining mantis, who had just caught Hinata and was strangling her with his own chain, since she'd already broken his sickle. Both sides were running out of weapons, chakra, and warriors. The Konoha team had some help from the medics running inside their ruined building, but that did little more than compensate for the initial disadvantage. Sakura had long since been humbled by this demonstration, as she'd always based her confidence in her ninja skills on the fact that she'd always been better than Naruto. Now that wasn't the case any longer. But apart from the genin trapped in the bath, other resources were being drawn onto their limits, and that included sending some of the most unlikely of the walking wounded out to do battle. Sasuke Uchiha dismissed a veil of fellow ninja offered him and joined the latest batch of battle-tuned shinobi on their way back out into the meat grinder. There wasn't a healthy ninja in sight, but Sasuke had an advantage over most of them in that he at least hadn't already exhausted his chakra reserves. In fact, they were untouched. And he wasn't the only one heavily bandaged, or hopped up on painkillers to a perilous degree. That made him suited to the heavy work. Unfortunately, he was already far gone into a vengeance kick against the one who'd cut off his balls. Sasuke joined the half-dead team assembling to go back out into battle, and with a crazy glint in his eyes muttered, "First I will kill that one, then I will kill him, and use his balls to rebuild my clan." "Not likely, you poo-wielding emo lord," Ino called out, coming in wounded and exhausted, hauling in a badly injured Hinata along with her. "Just try and be a little less pathetic than usual out there, alright? I mean kill someone before you die out there, okay?" Ignoring the former fangirl as she lay down in a blank spot and began fixing her and Hinata's wounds herself rather than joining the queue for the medics, although in the back of his mind he was trying to understand what her insult meant, Sasuke activated his Sharingan and charged out into the battle, only to get immediately blinded by dust that veil he'd turned down would have kept out of his eyes. Gah! The Uchiha disappeared out from the midst of his assault team as a giant tongue came down and snatched him up. Back inside the building, Neji came forward and stood beside Hinata where she lay, having Ino tend her wounds for her. The branch house Hyuga had seen the remnants of their enemy gathering outside. The last charge would come soon. Seeing their scout and early warning system move to a position ready to face enemy activity, the other exhausted and dying ninja of Konoha prepared for a final defense. Then a swarm of puppets attacked the sand shinobi from behind. Naruto had had to face sand pits and avalanches, dodge giant serpents and the ongoing summon battle, overcome sand clones and finally crest a net of wire traps to get his puppets to a position where they could relieve the embattled manor house, but he had done so. Those puppets were overlaid by illusions to look like their controllers, who all were shadow clones of Naruto. The puppets were also mixed with ordinary clones, and sprang upon the sand ninja as soon as they could throw weapons. Dodging an illusionary weapon is pointless, but still distracts, so the hail of incoming kunai gave the sand shinobi no room to maneuver, nor did their storm grant them any cover against those strikes, guided as they were by Naruto clones, using their bloodline's special vision. A fully rested and able shinobi force out of Suna could have engaged that puppet army with a fair degree of success. But they were every bit as beaten down as the Konoha forces. It broke their assault and they ran. Inside the ruined manor house, Neji relaxed, and announced the news. Those within raised a hearty cheer before turning to tend to their wounds. Naruto's feet had healed up enough for him and Anko to rejoin the battle, so finally the giant summons fight was turning in their favor as they both used temporary paralysis, to which snakes are especially vulnerable, to drop all summons Orochimaru attempted, while Anko added hers to the Konoha side. Of course, this led to a counter-attack by Kabuto. Only, after fighting him often enough to become sick of the guy's usual tricks, Naruto had added seals to the clan's outfits that blocked the chakra scalpel technique from functioning through the fabric of their clothes, unless you knew the counter seal, which all of the clan members did, and Kabuto didn't. Of course, there was also the fact that, having fought the traitor medic so many times now, Kabuto no longer had any surprises for them in his arsenal. He'd get close wanting to use his intricate little dodging tactics, and they'd hit him with a wide area smackdown jutsu, then finish him off while he was recovering from that technique. Normally the traitor was very, very good at avoiding hits, but his combination of martial arts plus advanced medical jutsu had some of the same shutdown methods as standard martial arts: pin him down, stop him moving, blow him apart from a distance. You couldn't dodge very well when you couldn't move your feet. Stick capture field was an excellent one for nailing the traitor medic in place so he couldn't move around very much. After that, it was almost a matter of preference what jutsu was used to finish him off. Some used thunderlance to watch him jiggle as the electrical charge fried his brain, others preferred to roast him in a more literal sense, using fire. When they had time and chakra to spare, many eager young medical students enjoyed cutting him apart slowly by employing wind. Carving apart a living target was certainly one way to study anatomy. So they could not only kill an enemy, but increase their medical knowledge at the same time. Although, they probably would never have resorted to such torturous tactics had they not learned that Kabuto had done the same to helpless Konoha citizens, both civilian and ninja alike. And, well, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and all. He'd started this himself doing it to innocent victims, so it was only right he got to experience it as the victim. So Kabuto was hardly any threat. They knew how to neutralize him. The trouble came from Orochimaru. The actual Snake Sannin had vanished from the battle a couple of minutes ago, which was allowing the Konoha faction to work fearsome slaughter on his allies and unattended summons. Naruto noted Sasuke coming up, but dismissed the emo as inconsequential. That lasted up until the Uchiha came up alongside, as if to help, and suddenly lashed out with his giant tongue, swallowing Naruto whole. Orochimaru Uchiha chuckled, dashing away towards the desert, hoping to make a getaway under cover of the ongoing storm and lose all pursuit in the sands. I will study you to find out where you get your enormous power, my blonde little friend. Then I will come back to destroy the rest of Konoha's rising legends, to make certain they do not rise at all. About his only regret was that the Uchiha whose body he now possessed had been nutted sometime during the fight. That would complicate the process of making replacement Uchiha bodies, and suddenly the Uchiha's stomach bulged. Then he exploded, and Naruto stood in dozens and hundreds among the gore, in one fist holding Kusanagi, the grass-cutting sword, claimed from Orochimaru's own belly. In the other he clutched the dog-summoning scroll, recovered from Kakashi's body. Almost too calmly, Naruto turned and started walking back to the destroyed camp. The surviving ninja would insist on sending word of this deceitful attack back to Konoha. The Hokage would call off the Chunin exams, just like he did every time the attacks and open fighting came early, and that would be the end of this reset. So, it being morning, even if a particularly dreadful one, he had all day to play with Orochimaru's sword and figure out how it worked. Actually, he'd hold on to it while making a few dozen more clones, then have some clones hand off their cloned swords to his wives, so they could play with them as well. He did so, and Yugao practically jumped his bones, to the accompaniment of Kin's wail of agony. Naruto, and all of his angels, would also sign the dog summoning contract to play around with those summons and see what could be learned about how to handle them. Hana, at least, was going to have something to redeem her day. Pity about Kiba though. Well. They'd see him in the morning. And they no longer had to wait for Tsunade and Shitsune to walk 2 days to rejoin them. He'd finally adapted the seals for that summoning trick used during the Forest of Death for summoning a Chunin, and gotten it to where if his beloveds were to scribe a seal on themselves where they were at, he could scribe a matching scroll where he was, and poof. Summon them across that distance like a super long-range teleport. Working the bugs out of that had made Tsunade very happy. The morning of the reset dawned. Lee, the Jonin of Team Guy, gave his favorite student a mighty hug in the early dawn light, as they met for training. Guy-sensei. The youthful green beast of Konoha greeted his teacher in much the same manner. Lee. Guy-sensei. Tenten, their normally reserved teammate, added herself to the hug. Lee. Guy-sensei. An orange-wearing Naruto joined the hug as well, much to the aforementioned duo's shock. Lee. Guy-sensei. Hinata pounced on them as well. Lee. Guy-sensei. Ino appeared from the other direction. Lee. Guy-sensei. Lee. Guy-sensei. Lee. Guy-sensei. Lee. Guy-sensei. More and more girls appeared to hug the startled duo of spandex-clad ninja, until finally the legendary Tsunade was added to the mix. For the first time ever, Guy's brain shut down in shock, and he fainted. The first demand, reset morning, after pulling an obligatory prank on the non-repeating Lee and Guy, just to show they cared, was naturally for Rai to teach them all those environmental specific exercises so powerful when used in Suna's defense. Toward that end, they drafted Gaara to create huge drifts of sand for them to practice on. Then a Rai clone simultaneously covered each technique in detail for clone audiences, while additional Naruto clones played children's games with Gaara. They used clones because this was primarily jutsu or chakra training, and so did not require the constant presence of the originals. Durability was not required, only a functioning mind, and their clones had that. Also, having defeated Orochimaru even once, even at such cost, had put a spring into everyone's steps. He could be beaten. Even if they didn't want to repeat many of the variables that led to that defeat, he could still be killed. That knowledge lent everyone a sense that the time loops could be resolved soon, and all suffered varying degrees of eagerness for the resolution thus offered. However, it also led to something of a rush of preparations. Nobody wanted to lose these chances to practice up critical skills, especially in risky areas, before those skills had been fully acquired. So a great number of projects that had previously proceeded at a very lazy pace got picked up smartly to be rushed towards conclusion. Medicine was an area of peculiar interest for all of them, as the opportunity to practice without concern for risk of the procedures tried was not going to come again, and, once lost, put a definite cap on what they could learn. More could be discovered under those conditions than perhaps any other. So it was either use this chance or lose it for all of those girls. Medical knowledge was priceless, as valuable as the lives that could be saved using it, and the opportunities for discoveries, progress made into areas never ventured before, was practically limitless during the loops, as they had literally no variables they didn't introduce themselves, which was absolutely unprecedented, and the most valuable research tool imaginable. Tsunad's requirements to cure something that had never before been cured put a fire under everyone's pants, as delving into those never before cured areas incurred loads of risks for the patient, and working those out properly where nobody permanently died was a priceless resource. And, realistically speaking, if they couldn't earn her stamp of approval as medics using those loops to their advantage, they weren't ever going to. So all of Naruto's angels began feverishly picking up the pace on their medical research projects, planning to have those done before the resets ended. Meanwhile, Tsunade and Shit soon began probing the frontiers of medicine yet further, not to qualify themselves, just to become still better at medicine so yet more suffering could be alleviated. The second demand was Hana's, insisting that they'd relied too much on poor Naruto to be their entire support network, as clearly he'd been overworked in spite of having thousands of clones, as proven by their having not had some critical items of their support infrastructure present during that last fight of theirs, notably the body armor for themselves. The Tigers got theirs done because Naruto was still fine-tuning those designs, and the Toad summons. So, they needed more summoners. Everyone could agree on that. What Hana demanded that surprised them, though, was taking that a step farther to say that all of Naruto's angels should pick up some of the support skills he offered to them, in particular when it came to equipment design and supply. As clever as he was, he couldn't think of everything. And if a few of his girls could help him do one thing or another, they'd get more of it done if he got suddenly distracted by, say, Anbu demanding they report to the Hokage to explain something like journey prep during a requip morning. Also, once they became good enough to do the equipment generation without aid, they could spare him more easily for the day required to get the Toad boss to accept him as a summoner. It was a course that should lead to fewer accidents where they went without things, and that desert fight would have been over much sooner with fewer casualties if Naruto's clones hadn't popped by the thousands over threats the armor he'd designed would have protected them from. So, by Hana's command, Naruto's angels set out to get fully trained in all of those skills they adored so in him, which was all of them. So they got all of the clones each woman could muster that weren't already practicing sand techniques out there training under Naruto to learn his support skills. Of course, that was far from the only major issue that had to be addressed. Since Naruto copied the remorseful Sakura's memories from the sand battle using that transfer technique he'd developed before discovering the Kitsune bloodline would preserve their memories by itself, they had to decide whether or not to restore those memories to the girl. By clan tradition, they made all major decisions undergoing spa treatments, although Naruto massages were forbidden for the duration of the debate, as no one would be able to think properly if enjoying one, and it was a strong encouragement to be brief and to the point, as those SS rank massages always came after the meetings were over. Tumrai led off their discussion, soaking in the water of their private hot spring, her hair splayed out over the stones. Surprisingly, I don't really mind Sakura anymore. I don't want to add her to the family, but as for adding her to the resets, why not? She got a much-needed kick in the pants and events basically drove her into the ground and broke her in tiny little pieces. Now we can make her into something new, move her in a new direction. Receiving a pedicure, was next to speak. I might not like Sakura, but I think she has been properly disillusioned about Sasuke. And she's paid 10 times the entry fee of any of us. I mean, she's basically been torn down to nothing, poor girl. While I agree I don't particularly want her to marry Naruto, We should let her reset to see if she could become someone worthwhile. Kuinai, lounging around on the grass, also offered her opinion. I'd say let Sakura join us all the way, temporarily at least. I think in the last reset she'd suffered enough to at least begin to repay for what she has done to Naruto. She deserves at least a chance to try to prove herself. After all, we gave Kin a chance and she was a sworn enemy none of us knew. Sakura is just a misguided, admittedly self-misguided, girl who isn't an enemy or someone we absolutely hate. Naruto doesn't stop loving easily, Hinata added fervently. We couldn't be so cruel to him as to give him a wife he doesn't want, and being temporary would only hurt him doubly. She gave her own teacher a sharp glare, causing Kuinai to wince. Ino gave a surprising snort of disgust. I agree with the statement, Sakura paid her entry fee. But Hinata's got a point. Do we have to add Sakura to our family? I don't have cause to think highly of her loyalty. Couldn't we bring her into the loops, then pawn her off onto Gaara? She might be able to save Sasuke from the career shift to blind soprano, though why she'd want to I don't know. Tsunade groaned in pleasure while receiving a foot massage from one of her clones, a distant second best to one of Naruto's, but better than nothing, and it warmed her up for later. I don't really like Sakura either, but I can see the point about the girl having paid her entry fee. Although, Ino has a point too about her lack of loyalty to friends, and Hinata's argument is sound. But now that Sakura's recognized her failings and been, as I am said, reduced to nothing, she has the chance to build upon a new foundation and become a better person than she's been. I think she deserves that much. Shitsune, surprising no one, agreed with her teacher. Personally, I'd suggest giving her a chance, at least a small one. Let's just let her into the resets and see if she can become someone better than she's been. It gives us an opportunity to look at the potential for second chances in others, which is something Naruto hasn't had to do much of thus far. Yet to become the ultimate ninja /kid, he should know when it can or cannot be done, I'd think. Let's do it the temporary way. That way we can throw her back if we don't see some kind of dramatic reversal. Anko chuckled, limbs splayed where she lay nudely and lewdly upon the tiles. We could always do it just to spite the broody bastard. Some of his fangirls have had second thoughts after seeing Ino drop him like a dead rat. If both of his prime supporters declare him unfit for female consumption, well, girls care about the opinions of other girls. It could destroy his popularity if we can name some cause for why they dropped him, and that should be easy. Kin shrugged from a patio table where she'd been enjoying a parfait. As for Sakura, if she can admit to her stupidity in not appreciating Naruto from the start, then I'm okay with letting her join us to any degree. Hinata was frowning. The situation of Sakura is not that easy. She did too much damage to Naruto in the past when he was vulnerable and needed her. And she has taken a lot of time for her to come around to him. We shouldn't trust her, especially not as a member of our family. Sakura's not that bad. She was simply trapped when she was a foolish little girl. How many of us were always as mature or as wise as we are now? Hannah asked the group her own question. She sighed. Yes, Sakura is an immature, arrogant little punk. And yes, Sakura should have actually seen Sasuke was a sulky little bastard with a superiority complex and a stick up his bottom a long time ago. But, so long as we keep her at a safe distance, that doesn't mean we should deny her a chance at improving herself as a person. Anko disagreed. Aside from her negative attitude towards Naruto, Sakura is a very fragile person who can't function without people supporting her and holding her hand. Her taijutsu and overall performance are pathetic, while her so-called intelligence hasn't gotten her any ninja skills worth the name. I still say draw her in to destroy Sasuke, but I like Ino's idea of pawning her off to Gaara once we're done with her. Tenten sighed. I'm just tired of watching her get hurt. Yugao, as den mother, looking to retire, had to withhold her own vote and watch as this debate played out. Luckily for her, she didn't care much either way about the girl, so she could declare the winner without any real bias. Ino considered for a long moment, before adding, interestingly enough, I seem to share similar thoughts to Tenten. I was kind of getting tired of watching Sakura get hurt, as, while she is extremely annoying, she's nowhere near as bad as Sasuke, or the hypocritical, lazy, and near-worthless teachers that are Jiraiya and Kakashi. Kin suddenly blurted out, watching people humiliated is all well and good, especially when they are jerks, and egotistical jerks at that. But watching someone get their heart metaphorically ripped out and stomped on again and again, and not even being allowed to remember what they did wrong to prevent it from happening again, really, she's been getting it much worse than Sasuke since he is too arrogant to care if no one likes him. It gets depressing after a while. Anko was silent for a moment, before adding, anyone who's ever felt emotional anguish in their lives, and it doesn't have to be emotional pain from betrayal, just emotional pain, would start to sympathize after some time. Okay, I'll admit, after a while I started thinking it'd be nice if she was at least allowed to remember the heartache the resets caused her, if not the actual memories, so she could stop setting herself up like that. Seeing the prevailing opinion going against her, Hinata spoke out to limit the damage for in case Sakura should act as she feared she would. I say we give Sakura a test run, temporary access to reset memories without being a clan member, like we did with Kin. That way justice gets satisfaction for past hurts, and if we still don't warm up to the idea of her being included, we can pawn her off on Gaara or Lee or someone else. Gazing around at those faces of the assembled angels, Yugao pronounced her judgment. Well, that appears to be the consensus. We all admit the girl has problems, but ought to get a chance to see if she can change. So, that's what we'd all like to see, whether or not she can make some shift to being a decent person. None of us like her as she is now, so she doesn't get to marry Naruto. We'd just like to see if it was possible for her to become someone better. Right. The den mother received a chorus of nods. Yugao sighed in relief. It wasn't often a clan council was needed, and this had been her first. She was glad it had been an easy one to resolve. Okay, then she gets brought into the resets on a provisional basis, a retainer rather than a clan member, with her future behavior determining whether she can remain in the resets with us at all. All in favor. There came a chorus of ayes. A Naruto clone got sent off to restore Sakura's memories of the last reset. But Kin brought up something that stopped the angles from dispersing to the hoped-for massages. As our next item of business, I'd like to inquire about the possibility of recruiting a spy in Orochimaru's organization, one higher placed than myself. Who do you have in mind? Hannah asked, eager to get her hubby's hands on her, and so a touch impatient to get the real business out of the way. Teiya of the Sound 4, Orochimaru's personal bodyguard group, and the closest thing he has to command lieutenants. She has far greater access to his plans and secrets than a lowly field agent like myself, and could help us blow the covers on whatever spies he must still have here, Kin answered. Anko was scratching her chin, deep in thought. Also, one of those who use a barrier to entrap the Hokage long enough for Orochimaru to murder him. If we can convert that chick to our side, that barrier would get dropped exactly when and where we wanted it to. Or never form in the first place. Any objections? Yugao called after a moment of silence where everyone considered things. Receiving none, she called, then it sounds like we ought to make the attempt. Kin, you and Anko do the planning for this mission. Let us know how and when to get Naruto to massage her. Right. The two Kunoichi formed extra clones, which sped off. Hinata remained delicately shocked for a long moment, before suggesting, Anko-chan, do you think your clone should have run off without clothes? What? What's going on? Where is the desert? Where is Orochimaru? What happened to all of our wounded? Did the sand ninja come back? Sakura started staring around, eyes freaked out the instant Naruto's hands left her forehead. Good morning. Tamrai greeted her with something of a smug smile, hand perched confidently on one cocked hip. We don't do this too often, so we don't have an organized welcoming committee or anything. But welcome to the time loops. The memories you have of last night are actually 1 month or so from now, and we don't plan to be repeating that pattern, so you won't see it happen exactly that way again. Today is the start of the Chunin exam, the written test portion. I know you won't believe me, so let's go to the center together and see. Where is Naruto going? The pink-haired girl asked, seeing him run off without a word to her. She was still panting in terror, not having quite resolved what the other girl told her. To join the Hinata patrols. She's run off on her own somewhere, and he's concerned that she didn't tell us, so he's scouring the city for her. Tamrai answered, unconcerned. Confused beyond rational capacity over the big issues, her brain reverted to the small ones, and Sakura pointed mutely at the Hyuga heiress, greeting her team members just a short distance in front of them. Tamrai just shrugged. A shadow clone. We all know the technique now, and he's panicking that the original ran off without telling us anything. It's got him real worried. Why did you all decide to join his harem? The pinkette asked, feeling that they were as alone as they were going to get in the middle of a village, and desperately wanting that question answered. The sand maiden chuckled, putting her arms behind her head in a gesture oddly reminiscent of Naruto. Can you really call it a harem? I mean, we girls are still outnumbered by boys, if you count all the shadow clones. I don't think the same terms apply when a girl can get all of the cuddling, snuggling and alone time with the guy she wants, anytime she wants. Deciding to grab the crux of the issue, for a girl, by the horns, Sakura went right to the heart of the relationship aspect. Are you planning to stay with him? She pressed, needing to know. Why would we want to leave? Tamrai shot her companion for the morning a disbelieving glance. Look, Sakura, he's everything a girl could want in a man. And the few times he's learned he was short on something, he devoted extra clones to learning it and became an expert overnight. The blonde stopped to wag her finger like a school mom before Sakura's chest. Naruto is the kindest, gentlest man I've ever met. And he's never once said anything to hurt my feelings. I can vouch for the rest of the group to say they could say the same. Plus, he's the richest man you'll ever meet, bar none. Naruto. Rich. Sakura had her own turn at looking disbelieving. What is wealth? Tamrai shot back. It is goods and labor, right? Well, he's been caught up in these time loops so long he's become an expert on most any trade you could name. So, instead of buying goods, he makes them. And since he has thousands of shadow clones working for him, he's effectively richer than my whole home village. Want jewels? He's got better than you'd find in the most upscale diamond market. Clothes. He began to catch us already the most accomplished tailor I'd ever heard of. The few times he's shown his real skill out in public, the fire daimyo ordered the Hokage to have him retired as a ninja so he could serve as their royal tailor. And he's only gotten better since. Food. Grown men have wept on eating his meals. He's strong, and he loves us to death. He's willing to do anything for us. What more could a girl ask for in a man? Tamrai stood back and shook herself. Sorry. I get tired of the Morans in this village treating him like some kind of monster, when he's the kindest, sweetest, wealthiest man you'll ever know, and the best ninja besides. The newly resetting girl's face scrunched up in confusion. How could the Fire Lord order the Hokage to retire Naruto? I thought we lived in a separate village. One that reports directly to the Hokage. Tamrai rolled her eyes and sighed. Look, Sakura, it's nice to feel independent, but we're not. Otherwise how could the Wind Lord order my village to reduce our ninja force by 2/3? We live in their country, we follow their rules. That's how the feudal system works. Sorry. But while we have more independence than most peasants, we ultimately still have to take the orders of our lords sometimes. Sakura's face scrunched, not quite believing, but discarded that, still wanting to define the parameters of this relationship she'd just dived into. Aren't any of you worried about how good a father the village prankster would be? Tamrai broke out laughing out loud, doubling over and clutching her gut. She raised 3 fingers by way of reply. 3 words, shadow clone parenting. We'll never have to worry about a babysitter, no arguments over whose turn it is to take care of them. There will always be enough of Naruto for him to rush forward to do the job. Want to go out an evening? He can do that, too. Worried that your children may grow up a stranger to their mother because their father spends so much time with them? Leave a shadow clone of your own behind. Children sick so they'll keep you up at nights. Let a clone take care of them while you get a perfect night's sleep, knowing you are on the job. And because they are your clones, you recall with perfect clarity all they did, too. And when you rest well at night while clones lose sleep, the clones you create in the morning are well rested, too, ready to go back to their duties. There is nothing to worry about. None of the ordinary strains on a marriage from parenting. You get to do everything you want, plus all of the duties you have to. Our children will receive better care than royalty, and us wives will still be pampered as much as he does now, which is frankly enough to make royalty envious. Tamrai had to wipe tears of laughter from her eyes. I'm not kidding there. The last time a courtier caught sight of us on a typical evening, Naruto was practically arrested and dragged before the Fire Lord, who demanded that he leave us and start taking care of them. It was hilarious, in a strange way. But lucky for us, Naruto doesn't find any of the Fire Lord's female relatives at all attractive, or we'd have to deal with their court practically every reset. The Fire Lord's already tried to marry him off to one of his daughters twice now. Sakura started to feel reassured, and said so, well, I guess I can handle being in the harem, then. No, you won't. Tamrai sobered instantly. Raising an admonishing finger, she instructed, marriage to Naruto is a privilege, and one you haven't earned. He is our most prized treasure, and the benefits of marriage to him are just too great to hand out to just anyone. She has to earn our trust, prove that she deserves the right, before we let him claim another bride. That's the way it worked with Kin, and that's the way it will work with Teiya, and the way it might work for you, if you could ever convince the rest of his brides that you had fully forsaken all of your old Naruto-hating ways. None of us will ever tolerate him having a girl close to him who hurts him. That's final. And you have years and years of being a bitch to make up to him before any of us, but in particular Hinata, would even think about forgiving you. You are, for the moment, a family friend. That's all. Being more depends on how well you handle even that much. Sakura's eyes widened in hurt that she could say such things, before she both sighed and nodded in understanding. They were justified. She'd been a complete and utter pill to Naruto. She didn't deserve his kindness. The pair of them joined the streams of genin teams flowing into the test center. Somehow along the way Sakura stopped even fighting the ridiculous thought of them having gone back in time, too. And, to her own surprise, found herself going through the motions as if accepting this all as real. Since it was real, she found herself totally convinced in short order. Kin showed up to the written test of the Chunin exam wearing Anko's former typical garments, mesh top, trench coat and mini-skirt. But, of course, neither boy on her team had ever met Anko, so they couldn't know that was the source of the costume change. Kin's face was aflame with a fire engine red blush as she sat down beside them, and when her teammates got up to look at her curiously, she snapped before either had opened their mouths. Don't. Just don't ask. That way I don't have to kill either of you. Doju pointed at her anyway. But. I lost a bet, Kin groused angrily, diverting her face away. I bet on a horse that couldn't make the distance, and this is my forfeit. Now be quiet. I'm embarrassed enough as it is. Doju leaned back, grinning. Is that thing going to flap open, by any chance? Zaku, the guy with the air tubes down his arms, asked, smiling and pointing at her trench coat. It better not. I glued the flaps to my breasts to make sure it wouldn't. Now if you want to die, go right on asking embarrassing questions. Kin drew a kunai out of her holster, looking angry enough to really kill someone. Zaku laughed, and both boys faced front in the examining room. No, it would be a bother explaining why we didn't pass this test for lack of a team member. Doju chuckled. Or two, Kin muttered darkly, leaning forward on crossed arms so the desk and her sleeves hid some of the easy view of her cleavage. The day of the reset had spurred a frenzy of activity. They'd nearly lost the fight against the Suna ninja rather terribly. Luckily, they'd turned that around, and in the end Naruto had saved a copy of the remorseful Sakura's memories. But, to everyone's surprise, Kiba's memories had made it through, too. The instant Hana hugged her brother on reset morning, all of Kiba's memories had come flooding back to him. They'd discovered this only after the family conference, when the boy had acted confused and outraged about having to go back to take the first Chunin test again. That was pretty much of a dead giveaway. So, one of Hana's clones was off explaining the situation to him, things her brother had to know as a provisional friend of the clan, just as Tamrai was saying the same things to Sakura, where she was also declining, on Naruto's behalf, the Pinkette's offer of sex, much to her shock and amazement, even though it got explained she'd be taught ninja skills anyway. Kiba's unexplained arrival had led to some excited discussions among Clan Kitsune, not the least of which was how, exactly, his sister had done it so that it could be duplicated, so friends and brothers, fathers and teachers could be brought in as well, multiplying the number going through the resets, and potentially the strength of Konoha. Hana had faithfully relayed what she'd known about what had happened, which wasn't much. However, it was the Kyuubi who was the real surprise. They'd sought her out in an agony of frustration, knowing this was possible but unable to reconstruct how, when the demoness just up and explained it. Oh. You mean you didn't know? The fox had inquired innocently, having been in a more natural-looking clone, for her, these past few resets, playing in the forest chasing rabbits and butterflies. I hadn't realized you hadn't known all along. Sometimes you act so fox-like it's hard to grasp you didn't come into being with the regular instinctual understanding of this. She hopped up on a cushion, finished chasing rabbits for now, settled back on her haunches and explained, well, it's quite simple. Foxes are masters of illusions, and really this is a naturally occurring, well, like a mirage in time, and that's quite close enough to an illusion for us to have an influence over it. The regular fox-sized Kyuubi, currently displaying only one tail so she didn't spook all of the guards around Konoha, shrugged in a completely anatomically impossible way for a canine. Poor things occur when time and destiny don't mesh properly. Time insisted that Naruto had to die, having jumped through that violet field, but destiny wasn't finished with him. So you get this glitch as they work it out together. Destiny always wins these things, but it would have taken a few centuries caught up in the swirl for that to occur on its own. Normally, nobody involved in these things is even aware they are caught up in them, and it would have resolved itself without anyone the wiser, most probably by destiny stepping in to cause Naruto to select one of the paths he had not taken, and rush off in some other direction, rather than jumping into that field where time would have insisted he die again. The tiny Kyuubi yawned, displaying her canine teeth, before curling up in a furry ball on her cushion, emitting an air of smugness. Of course, being who we are, it was impossible to trap us for long. Our natural foxy cunning makes that absurd to try. We are natural tricksters, and gifted in illusions, so this state which is both a trap and an illusion couldn't have power over us long. Naruto kept his awareness and memories, instead of forgetting like everyone else, and figured out he was repeating almost at once, displaying his true foxy intellect. Then, of course, he took you as mates, and that enabled his gifts to shelter you from the endless forgetting. Then you had the wonderful good sense to see how superior it was being foxes, and once you'd accepted my adoption, if you will, into our magnificent species, you gained the power to shelter your own loved ones the same way he did originally, creating a harbor for their memories within the shelter of your own minds. We're also modest, I see. Kyoinai deadpanned. Yes, aren't we? The Kyuubi grinned, completely missing the joke, and preening while other girls stifled giggles at her expense. Male to female and vice versa is the only way this sheltering works. Males hold males as rivals, and females hold other females as rivals. So it blocks the trust required. So that means we can bring in everyone we want. Ino shouted gaily, happy to have her relationship to her parents restored at last. Naruto can bring in all of our sisters and moms, while we can grab our fathers and brothers. Hey! We can even bring in the whole village. Not quite, the Kyuubi cautioned, having stopped preening for a moment. I am in Naruto, so he has much more of my powers than any of you, and thus more capacity. Also, you are only partial foxes, having much more human left in you than Fox added, so you have far from infinite power to manipulate this illusion as you'd like. I sense each of you can only bring in one person, and, due to the natural cleverness of a foxy mind, that must be someone whom you trust intimately. If you don't love them, you could never draw them in, and if you don't trust them you will instinctively rebel against bringing their mind into contact with yours, as that's where you keep all of your secrets. And, being foxish, you naturally don't want them stolen. Anko snorted, lounging back and crossing her hands behind her head. No way am I doing it then. Hinata's face had blushed rosy in defiance, and she insisted, I am staying loyal to Naruto. Ino had also blushed rosy, before turning green. Yeah. The idea of cheating on my husband just makes me sick to my stomach. The Kyuubi chuckled at their response, and resumed human form. Since she was inhabiting one of Naruto's shadow clones, her human form was naturally the one he'd created for his sexy technique, and in this form they called her Vicky to avoid alerting villagers that their demon was on the loose. No chance of that. He's taken you as his mates. Most animals would have lost all interest after getting you with pups, but he shows no signs of ever deciding to leave you. Of course, being foxes, you had small chance of that. We are social animals, communicating and cooperating and living together in family groups. Mated foxes will risk their lives to distract pursuers from each other or their cubs. We make truly spectacular mates and parents. As arrogant as that statement was, the assembled girls were all too busy feeling relief over that declaration to poke any fun at it. Of course, normally we match up in pairs, Vicky allowed with a roll of her head. Multiple vixens is unusual. Normally, we don't go much into that. Dogs and wolves are the ones that form packs, not us. Too cumbersome. However, I don't claim to understand human mating customs. What I can tell you of our own is that until he releases you, which, as I've told you, most animals would have already done, but foxes are too clever by half to treat something as important as mating as casually as most creatures. Would you risk your life for a mate you never intend to see again after this season? Quite sensibly, Naruto shows no signs of ever doing anything so unfoxy as mating you. You'll have no interest or ability to mate with someone else. In fact, should you find that such feelings could exist towards a person, or they have them towards you, you'll be unable to bring them into your mind. And, if they had a shelter there already, they'd be ejected. One mate per vixen, that rule, at least, he has kept. Otherwise I'd be concerned he was turning into a dog. So, to bring someone into the resets we'd have to love them, in a non-mate kind of way. Like a brother. Hannah mused, before grinning. Vicky tossed hair off her shoulder in a haughty huff. Frankly, I don't see what you humans have against mating with brothers. But, yes, if you love them and not as mates, that could qualify for that part. But you'd still have to trust them with having access to all the secrets you possess. About that part, that's the second time you've said it. Ino protested. But I don't understand what you mean about stealing secrets. Vicky made a finger gesture and suddenly they were all in the elegant manor house that served as Naruto's mind. Now they were in the total privacy of his mind. She released her own foxy accessories, tails, ears and whiskers appearing to match the rest of the clan, although she appeared far more comfortable with them on than even the most veteran of Naruto's wives. Vicky walked up to a wall, where hung a portrait of Naruto. They were in the concert hall section of his mind, and the portrait was of him playing the flute masterfully. Beside the portrait hung several ribbons for performances well done, and a silver flute stood on a pedestal before this display. Naruto knows how to play the flute, right? The Kyuubi in human form thrust out a finger at the little display. She got several nods from confused women, wondering what the point was. Vicky then took down the portrait, flute and ribbons, shifted them all to her own gilded cage out in the gardens, hung them back up there and proudly proclaimed, "Now I do." There came gaping astonishment at this smug declaration, but to prove it, the embodied fox lifted the flute and played. Exactly as Naruto had done. They could recognize his style. Ino was white-faced in shock. Naruto won't be able to play until you put those back, will he? Vicky shook her head, smiling. Only an enemy would take those abilities he'd created away from him, Anko told the fox dryly. Vicky gave a nasty start, and pained grimace, before snatching them all up again and quickly shifting them back to the concert hall portion of Naruto's mind, where she replaced everything just as it had been before, breathing a sigh of relief as she did so. I was only going to borrow them, the demon snorted defiantly. To everyone's surprise, Kin reappeared, having run off to get a canvas and stand from her room. These she set up before all of their puzzled gazes, and began to paint. "What are you doing?" Tenten asked, concerned. The former sound ninja smiled to all of them. "Why, I am creating a copy of a great piece of art. Want to join me?" "What are you trying to do?" Kyuinai emphasized. The dark-haired girl gave off a delicious shrug. "I thought it would be obvious. If hanging this painting in my room would make me able to play flute like our beloved husband does, I want to see if creating a copy of that portrait out of my own materials would do the same. We are all in our minds right now, so it's all symbolic anyway. And I don't want to steal, only to have a copy for my own. Wouldn't we all like to be able to do what he does?" The other angels all ran off to their mental rooms to grab paints, scattering to go copy portraits of the skills they most desired. There came an almost instant moment of surprise when Tenten started to copy his weaponsmithing abilities that way, only to see the paints practically fly off of her brush onto the canvas, almost painting the portrait for her, although, instead of showing Naruto at his forge, the painting was of Tenten. "What's going on?" The weapons mistress recoiled from the spooky canvas. "Oh, that's something one of your clones is practicing out in the real world." Vicky yawned conversationally. "Naturally, your efforts to copy that skill here and there add to each other. You are telepathically reinforcing the training you are doing in the outside world." The ladies of Clan Kitsune stared at each other for a shocked instant, before reorganizing quickly to work on things their shadow clone doubles were trying to learn out in the real world. If one was going to try and learn something, might as well go for the best results, the fastest you could get them. "I think I'm going to put a clone on learning painting from our hubby." Rai popped out of the mindscape, saying, "Back in a second." Once more the others looked at each other. "That was pure genius," Tsunade aloud, speaking thoughts for all of them. Naruto was a great master artist, having been practicing for ages as a hobby he used to relax from the continual strains and frustrations of his condition. His skill had, naturally, improved over all of that time and practice, until he was a truly significant artist, alone in a village not known for its devotion to peaceful arts like music and painting. Given that they were a militaristic culture not overly inclined to fine arts, Naruto was probably the most advanced musician, sculptor, painter and so on the village had ever spawned. His mindscape was covered in detailed art. But that was the trick. A mindscape was made up of metaphors, and to do a better job of copying a painting, it helped to be a painter. Even though it was strictly a metaphor, having a metaphorical advantage ought to make things go more easily and quickly. They all popped out to go task clones with learning painting from him. Back in a jiffy, they all set up their easels in the artwork room section of Naruto's mind around the self-portrait of him standing in an artist's smock, with a palette of mixed colors in one hand and a brush in his other, a big smile on his face as the portrait of Naruto stared at an empty canvas of his own, about to paint. The portrait caught him in a relaxed and confident mood. The amount of artwork hanging around the room was truly intense. "I have a question," Kin stated, pausing as she was in the act of getting her tools together. "Vicky, you'd said we'd need to trust someone absolutely before we could let them into our minds, that our natural foxy natures would prevent us from allowing access to someone we didn't love or trust. So, the former sound maiden paused, drawing in a deep breath. How was it that Naruto was able to copy my memories? I mean, he had to grant me a room in his mind before I was even married to him, just so I could join the resets. How was he able to do that? Ino put down her paintbrush and nodded. Yeah. That's been bugging me, too, ever since I first heard you explain it. If Naruto still loves and trusts Sakura by now, after all she's done, then he's hopeless. She's never done anything that would inspire either love or trust. That actually worries me more than a bit. He doesn't trust everyone, does he? That could be a disaster. Vicky popped her eyes up over the top of an easel of her own sheet arranged beside the others, to look at her housemates. Oh. No, don't worry about that at all. I was giving instructions for you girls. The same rules don't apply to boys. For one thing, he has this seal holding me lodged in his mind, that opens up a crack nothing can quite fix. Luckily, there are few who know how to take advantage of that, and I can guard against most attempts to take advantage of him through it, seeing as how it's me that's caught in the door so to speak. I am what's wedged his mental shields open a crack, so I'm first guardian. But for the other, boys are naive in a sweet yet charming way. What do you mean? Shitsune asked, pausing in unstoppering a tube of colors. Vicky gave them all a shrug. Boys are generally foolish enough to believe that any female they can dominate is trustworthy. To be fair, females are generally foolish enough to prove them right. So, to a very large extent, control can be substituted for trust by men, so Naruto can grab memories out of any females he has reason to believe are subject to him. And, a girl under one of his massages promising to love him forever qualifies. And the love aspect? I am asked quietly, not knowing if she ought to feel horrified by that previous revelation. The Kyuubi in human form shrugged her pretty shoulders. Because of the crack in his mental shields, it doesn't have to be much, and Naruto is one of those rare people who's willing to love anyone a little bit. Why else would he have been so concerned about becoming Hokage and protecting a village that hated him? I'm so very sorry. We wanted to keep it a secret until we could surprise everybody, Hinata's shadow clone mourned. Naruto and Shitsune looked down upon the pale body stretched out lifeless on the medical table, deep below the surface of Konoha, in one of Orochimaru's hidden laboratories, where they'd discovered them hiding out. Why did you use the original? Shitsune queried, noting that her husband was too choked up to do so for himself. The three of Hinata's clones she'd left behind to perform the procedure on her original body all looked terrible, but no worse in their grief than Naruto. Because it was an invasive medical process, the cellular alteration was too close to damage to perform on a clone. It had to be her. None of us would do. It worked, but only for a few seconds before she. Inside a planter a couple of feet away, a trio of cherry trees stood about 3 feet high apiece. Crying and grieving, Naruto reached out with trembling hands to draw a sheet over the pale, dead face of his most beloved wife, the one who'd always believed in him, trusted him, and, the first to love him. Shitsune formed extra clones to summon all of the wives. Naruto would need them now. And she also sent off one extra to report to Anko to flung Naruto out of the tests immediately. It didn't matter her excuse, their husband would be too far gone with grief to do anything until they'd reset and he had Hinata back. That couldn't happen soon enough, actually. Shitsune took one of the clones aside, and whispered, "Okay, you are going to tell me everything you did. You get credit for the discovery once we complete it, don't worry about that, but this process is too much for one of us to do alone. You're going to brief us all on what you did, how it went, and what went wrong, so we can help you get it right. Hurting Naruto like this is just not something any of us want to do, so you can't be permitted to go playing around with these experiments unsupervised again, alright? This is now a project for the whole clan, and we work on it together. Alright. Hana, when she arrived moments later, echoed those sentiments precisely. Yugao would repeat them again moments later, and Tsunade not long after that. Hinata would have her medical badge, just delayed until they could get her to live through the bloodline implantation process. Anko failed Naruto's team out of the tests for being loud, obnoxious brats, when they hadn't said a word, the moment she announced the second stage. The wives kept the knowledge of what had happened from his various clones so they could go on with the ordinary business of training, and copy over Sakura's memories again that evening as she went to sleep, so they didn't have to explain things to her all over again. Hana, on Kyuubi's advice, was able to do the same for Kiba. Meanwhile, another Naruto had been making his own way around town after his own purposes. That clone had been tasked with finding some of Konoha's summoning seal masters and learning what he could of their art. Finding a place of business had been no problem. Those masters did a rather large amount of volume in their summoning, and old or retired shinobi of every stripe and description seemed to gravitate there as assistants, using their chakra to activate scrolls in giant warehouses, seeing what they got. It was a great retirement scheme for people whose bodies would no longer permit them to go about doing active combat, but whose minds had been trained up in how to use and focus chakra. Excess socks got baked down to charcoal and used to run furnaces to heat buildings. Everything else got sorted according to type and catalogued. What they knew how to recognize got used, and some of the rest got fiddled with to see if anyone could figure them out. However, the clone's attention got riveted by a bit of garbage just thrown aside as useless, after a shinobi had ripped apart the packaging on a new set of wireless radios. It was an instruction booklet. More importantly, it was an instruction booklet written for an international audience, with the same instructions printed in different languages side by side. The clone eagerly snatched up this Rosetta Stone and made off with it, after having carefully checked around, and grabbed other, similar bits of garbage. A long time ago, he'd tried translating a book on chakra control theory, as it had been one of only 2 available that he could find in the teacher resource library for the Anbu classes. Despite countless hours of trying, he'd never been successful in translating the unknown language that book had been written in. He could recognize the characters as katakana, but the words and meanings. No, he'd been hopelessly lost, only now he was found, because he had there a small handful of books printed in both his native Japanese, and this other language, the ever-mysterious English. It was all he could do to avoid cackling as he devoured this clue. Naruto pivoted lightly on the grass of the Kitsune compound, practicing the Hyuga heavenly spin technique. He'd mastered the art of expelling chakra from every point on his body a very long time ago, just as another exercise for perfecting his lousy chakra control. Having seen Neji do this, and having heard the theory behind it, it had been a simple step to realize that it could help, as any chakra manipulation exercises at all improved his ability to command his massive reservoirs. Command of those massive reserves had been a worthy goal for a long while, but now that he had a genuine copy of the Hyuga bloodline abilities, he had a use for that technique itself, the way it was intended to be used. He also had chakra reserves to be spending it profligately, using the perfect defense more times, more often, and longer than any Hyuga who'd ever lived. where they had to time things perfectly, so as to use the energy-wasting technique for only the briefest amounts of time. Naruto had no such limitations. That made it easy to learn how to use, comparatively. He also had opportunity to fully master the gentle fist, since the Kyuubi had added those eyes to their bloodline. And he had to admit that as a soft style with less emphasis on strength to do its damage, he would be more deadly at this style than any other he knew, so long as they stayed trapped in resets. Having copied Neji's use of it was also a substantial advantage. He'd never be as fast as the Hyuga prodigy so long as his physical development was stalled, but that was no excuse not to fully master everything he could about this now, when, in spite of not matching Neji, it would be his best fighting style. Of course, there was another reason for his Hyuga-centric training today. Hinata had unintentionally killed herself performing medical experiments to implant the bloodline-allowing wood techniques. While Naruto loved all of his wives, Hinata had a special place among them, as having believed in him and supported him so much longer than any of the rest, even before she'd had any clue about the resets going on. The favors she'd done him, loving and believing in him, and in being his friend when no one else would, created a bond that nothing else came close to. He couldn't stand to lose her. He could laugh about Sasuke getting nutted, or shrug about Sakura bleeding to death, yawn over most demises and cheer over the deaths of Konoha ninja so long as they were funny, but anything threatening to Hinata hit deep right in that protective area that triggered his most primal responses. Nothing could be permitted to hurt her. Nothing at all. But he couldn't deny her anything she wanted, either. And, having come so close to perfecting the medical implantation of that bloodline, she'd wanted to finish her work. He had to agree on one aspect. Those wood techniques made for a powerful addition to the clan's arsenal. They were rare enough few counters existed for them, powerful in their own right, versatile, and a great way to play with the minds of Sharingan donkeys, since they couldn't copy them. It also had more non-combat utility than any other ninja technique, except perhaps for the shadow clone. So, while on the practical front, he had to agree to the completion of those experiments that could lead to Hinata gaining those abilities. He didn't want her hurt. Of course, with Tsunade and Shitsune there helping, actually the whole rest of the clan, including himself, Naruto wasn't about to be left out of this. There was a substantially reduced risk of errors. Their accumulated medical skills had already plugged several of the holes Hinata herself had overlooked. So it seemed a very reasonable risk. Everything built upon the bloodline-sharing medical techniques they, as a clan, were already well familiar with. That part was completely understood, in detail, by them, better, even, than Orochimaru, who'd started the work on this process. It's just, the part they understood was only a piece of this. Bloodline sharing techniques wouldn't work to pass on abilities taken from anything but fresh tissue, and no living samples of a wood technique user existed. The first Hokage was dead, and Tsunade did not possess an active bloodline from him. So the only tissue samples to work from were stuff that the regular, known bloodline transferal practices were useless on. Orochimaru had struck out into new territory with his experiments, and he had never cared for the welfare of his test subjects. Those notes he'd left behind, while startlingly complete and accurate, had also stopped short of real success. The Snake Sunin had begun testing far before any competent medic would have counted the procedure safe to try. Orochimaru was brilliant, clearly a genius, a mad one, but still a genius. He had developed some truly revolutionary ideas for the concept of stealing bloodlines out of dead tissue. However, he'd never completed the work. It was like trying to walk over 3/4 of a completed bridge. You still fell in the gorge before you could get across. It didn't get you all of the way to your destination. The Snake Sunin considered an experiment a success when he could get one person in 10 to survive the upgrade. At that point he was willing to stop calling it an experiment and make it a standard practice without any further refinement. But even by that measurement, his posthumous bloodline theft process had failed dramatically. Tsunade was far and away a better medic than Orochimaru had ever been, and Shitsune was not far behind. Between them, and the rest of the clan who'd been studying medicine under them, they had managed to fill in many of the holes in Orochimaru's theories and fix up the base of his design. According to Tsunade, the hard part was what was left. Even granted the specific body of knowledge Orochimaru had left behind in his research notes, Tsunade cooperating to provide living, if dormant, samples of the bloodline, and all of the work they had done to refine and improve the process. Chance of survival was fairly dim indeed. Even using Hinata, on whom the process had been done once before, and thus the person on whom they had the most copious research notes and material, the survival chance was only something like 1 in 10. For Orochimaru that would be fine. He'd stick something like that into mass production. But for Naruto, where Hinata was concerned, it was so far into unacceptable that he'd barely restrained himself from forbidding them to proceed. And he'd only just managed that because of Hinata's personal plea to him that he not. They'd obey him if he gave such an order, but no one would be happy to have come so close and not succeed in so potentially vital an area. Darn it. Not even Naruto would be happy to have come so close and not go the rest of the distance. But this was Hinata. She'd die again, he knew it. And, even though that was temporary, and despite the fact that they'd learn more about what not to do while doing it, and thus have a far better chance to make this work on everybody else, not to mention they only had to get the process to work once, then they'd ever after be able to repeat those steps exactly to grant the gifts to Hinata again. Dang it. It hurt to see her die. No matter if it was temporary. The boy threw himself into his practice of Hyuga techniques with redoubled fury, determined to distract himself, even if he was only a clone of Naruto. The original had insisted that he lie on a medical table beside Hinata, with the work proceeding in parallel on him at the same time as her. Because, dang it. If she was going to die, he, sure as anything, didn't want to live through it. All of Naruto's clones were having similar problems distracting themselves while the research process into gaining the wood bloodline continued. Naruto stepped out onto the grass under the forests of Konoha, turning this way and that, lifting one leg, and assuming various martial arts stances for Ebisu. It had been an age or so since he'd last seen the special Chunin in his capacity of teacher, and the boy had long since more than fully mastered the last lesson he'd received from the closet pervert. So, he'd felt it time to see if the guy had any last tricks to impart. So he'd faked a copy of the Hokage's encrypted note to the guy, this time complete with remarkably well-forged security seals, so he could be getting this training while still undergoing the Chunin exam. Ebisu carefully adjusted his glasses, critical of the boy's form. Very well, tell me what techniques you already know. Naruto sighed, beginning again the litany. My basic 3 are fully mastered, sealless and almost traceless. My essential 8 and traveling 10 likewise. I know shadow clone, and 2 distraction techniques of my own devising, but you already know about those. The boy finished with a knowing grin. Ebisu coughed and adjusted his glasses, attempting to master a slight blush. Yes, well. Naruto shrugged and went on. I've got basic affinities in all 5 elements, and can cut, crinkle, moisten, burn and powder leaves I hold in my hands, with a couple of combat jutsu from each element, as well as the standard 3 chakra control exercises mastered to the point where they don't teach me anything anymore. It wasn't worth counting those exercises from Suna, as they were still in the act of learning those from Tamrai, and Ebisu wouldn't ask about them anyway. The special Jonin's jaw had dropped, but he mastered himself and adopted a stony expression. "Show me," he commanded. So Naruto did. Ebisu began sweating, glancing back down at the Hokage's note from time to time during this demonstration. The note was clear. The encrypted message said to teach Naruto something, preferably a low-ranking jutsu, or something more basic if he needed it. The teacher's impulses had been to show the boy the least advanced thing he could get away with while still following the Hokage's instructions. It wasn't in his mind to be terribly helpful to the demon brat, only to stay in the good graces of the Hokage, so he could retain the job of instructing his grandson. Sweat droplets ran down the teacher's face in lines as Naruto showed him proficiency after proficiency. No wonder the kid had been entered into the Chunin tests. He'd have been a shoo-in for that rank for sure. Guiltily, the teacher began wondering which of the blonde's teammates must have gotten their team thrown out. He'd felt sure up until this demonstration that if Team 7 failed it would have had to have been due to Naruto, but the village pariah had obviously been concealing hidden depths. His skills were extraordinary. Not that Ebisu had believed his eyes before he'd tried every illusion negation technique he knew on the lad. But this was Naruto all right. The demon container was coming to the end of an impressive sum of jutsu, more than Ebisu himself knew, really, and the special Jonin was running out of excuses. The Hokage wanted the kid taught something, but what? Everything that could be considered low rank the demon brat knew already, better than Ebisu himself, in most cases. Then the teacher thought of something, and a smile spread out across his face as the boy came to the end of his already impressive arsenal, showing off a gusty barricade technique that successfully blocked several weapons thrown by the boy's clones. "Very good, Naruto. I'm impressed." The teacher winced behind his facade at being forced to praise someone he'd always secretly despised. "I guess it is time for me to reveal the true secret behind D-ranked missions. Tell me, how many have you done?" The boy looked at him warily, then shrugged. "Over 20. Ebisu was nodding, before holding out his hand. "Come. Let's go to the office and get one of each of the major varieties. After this, I'll have nothing more to teach you. Request a different instructor from the Hokage, if he wants to show you something again." Ebisu smirked within himself. "I have nothing more to teach you." Could speak of willingness instead of ability. But frankly, he wasn't willing to part with any of his mid or high-ranked techniques to the demon brat. And, as that note from the Hokage had specifically said low, he wasn't required to, either. Doubtfully, the boy followed the special Jonin along, until they were standing before a fence, open paint buckets beside them, and a mission to paint it. The teacher had his arms crossed proudly, and he shouted, "Not that way," as Naruto reached for a paintbrush. Adjusting his eyeglasses in a conceited manner, the special Jonin explained, "There are 2 ways to do most any D-ranked mission. One builds your body, the other your chakra and elemental affinities. Since you already have your basic affinities mastered," and there was no way the special Jonin was going to breathe a word over how impressed he was at that, "this ought to be easy for you. Observe." Ebisu formed a hand seal, a basic one for water, and a glob of paint jumped out of the bucket and onto the fence in front of them, before beginning to spread itself out evenly, without using a paintbrush. The special Jonin was expecting his student to be awestruck, but in his desire got disappointed. Still, his professionalism didn't allow him to show it, so he rather arrogantly continued, although it has many impurities, fresh paint is still at the core of it a liquid, and all liquids behave as water. Learning control of water without using tools is an important step in becoming a successful shinobi, and so we give D-ranked missions to our genin so they have a chance to practice while getting paid doing a useful job to help the village. Naruto was nodding, gradually coming to accept this. Forming the same hand seal, he got his own glob of paint to jump out of a bucket and, after some initial difficulty, begin coating the fence. Not wanting to waste his own time, Ibisu ordered the boy to leave some clones there to finish that mission, and took him out on a garbage clean-up assignment they'd accepted at the same time. Now it's really the same thing here. The teaching specialist stood beside a large garbage receptacle, pointing out over a litter-strewn park. Use wind to blow refuse out of the bushes and trees into a pile, instead of gathering them with your hands. When you are really good, you can blow them directly into the container, like so. He formed a hand seal having to do with air, and an empty bag of chips dislodged itself from some tree branches, fluttering and struggling toward the garbage receptacle. Ibisu was sweating, his body trembling, and his face screwed up in concentration, but the trash soon came to land, not in but beside of the metal mesh barrel he'd been aiming for. Pretending not to notice his instructor's struggle or lack of success, Naruto formed his own hand seal and began using directed breezes to collect refuse. It did not take him long, due to his extensive practice using other exercises, before he had the first few items land in the barrel instead of beside it. Once more, Ibisu ordered him to leave some clones there to finish the mission, and took him off to empty a septic tank, explaining that the sludge within was a form of mud, and earth techniques were best practiced using mud, as it was considerably more mobile and responsive than dry dirt was. There was also substantial motivation to get your control right, so as not to get any on yourself. This time Ibisu stood back a far distance beyond easy splash range and asked Naruto to form an earth hand seal he showed him, then begin to use chakra to clean the septic tank, manipulating the contents to do as he willed and empty the system that way. Naruto obediently formed a few clones and began. We have low-ranking missions associated with most forms of training, the teaching specialist explained as he immediately led the boy away, not waiting to get pranked with stuff out of the sewer line. It turned out the practice mission for fire was something Naruto had never done officially, helping out at a local bakery. It turned out hiring a genin team for a day was a great deal less expensive than paying for a day's worth of good charcoal to run the ovens, and heating them with chakra so they were just the right temperature, neither too hot nor too cold, and maintaining it there was hard work, but not so hard a genin team couldn't manage it so long as they had a budding fire affinity or two among the members. Surprisingly, although he had an advantage on this with all of his work using chakra on forges doing metal working, it turned out to be a different kind of exercise than he'd worked out for himself, so Naruto could still benefit from the experience. After they'd left behind clones doing that, Ibisu taught him, it is thanks to lightning users that our towns have functional electrical systems. It took their sensitivity to their specialty to sense the flow of energy and connect things together to get us to where we could assemble anything usable. So the next mission was doing electrical work on an old lady's house, trying to find the faults preventing parts of her house from having power, so they could fix them. It turned out the place was far overdue for being rewired completely. But tracing everything, telling if it was live or capable of being live, and seeing where those faults were taught mid-level chakra control, especially in the lightning element, better than anything Naruto had done before. Previously, he'd been forced to go from low-level elemental affinity training, all of the way up to extremely high level, skipping out on all of the steps in between. So, while this wasn't entirely new, it still managed to teach the boy things on a level of detail he'd previously been unaware of. It was like that for all of those D-ranked chakra exercises. Leaving a few clones to play handyman and fix everything, Naruto allowed his teacher for the day to lead him away, presumably for another assignment. Babysitting has all of the same elements as most bodyguard missions Ebisu taught, leading him out to a park. As does walking dogs and helping out the elderly. Recovering lost pets is excellent practice for later search and retrieval assignments, so if you look at them in those lights, those missions teach valuable, practical lessons on future shinobi life. Now, given that, what do you think could be learned by grocery shopping? Intelligence gathering. Naruto shrugged, having come to that conclusion long ago shopping with Ino, even before she'd begun resetting with him. You are given a set amount of money and time. Any savings you make without a reduction in quality is money you get to keep. So finding the best buys is crucial. But you can't take too long looking or you fail the assignment. Yes, Ebisu agreed, slightly deflated, and impressed in spite of himself that the student knew the answer. So, what would you say about gardening? Survival practice. The child shrugged. Learning how to recognize edible plants, telling them apart from weeds, could keep you alive in the wild if you ever have to forage for your own food. And there is no substitute to handling the actual plants for learning how to recognize them. His teacher nodded. Excellent, Naruto. He paused to stare up at the sky for a moment. Package delivery is a typical ninja assignment even for Chunin, it's just the stakes are higher out in the world. All these are the real ninja training assignments, preparing you for your future. Properly done, they teach more than just teamwork, but how to function on missions you should be taking every day as mature ninja. One of the most prized D-rank missions is helping out at a slaughterhouse, butchering animals. You do not get better acquainted with blood and carving flesh in any other way, not even in combat, than in killing and carving apart meat animals for sale. Those who have done it are far less liable to freeze in any combat scenario. Ebisu adjusted his glasses, then folded his arms, staring off to the distance. What most teachers ought to do, but forget to, is have their team only do each of the practice mission assignments like babysitting, dog walking, or package delivery, only once or twice to get the basics down before they split one genin off to be an opposition force for testing the rest of their team. The bad genin tries to prevent the two good genin from completing their mission assignments, with their jonin on hand to stop anything from getting out of hand, and reward good thinking. They should also trade, every mission, which one of them is the opposing force, so each genin gets practice working both sides, offense and defense. The teacher shrugged. They use thrown fruit or water balloons instead of kunai, but a splat of jam is enough of a marker to say if this assignment had been real, your client would have been dead. Of course, getting hit by a ripe fruit is enough to take an attacking ninja out of the action as well. So he has to be careful to either be stealthy, or take down the guards first. The special Jonin actually smiled down on Naruto. Because, you see, as ninja we can be expected to try to attack targets who have bodyguards, prevent enemy extraction teams from capturing our agents, stop enemies gathering intelligence to use against us, or intercept valuable packages they are trying to deliver, as often as doing those things ourselves. So we have to practice both sides of each style of ninja assignment. A truly thorough instructor will have his team continue on in these mission training exercises until he has 2 bad genin and only 1 good one for each test, to teach them how to think out situations where they are on the defensive and outnumbered. It is a remarkably valuable teaching tool. The blonde boy's eyes widened, able to see for the first time what he meant. The real secret of those D-ranked missions was that the assignment was not the teaching tool, it was the opposition during it. It was the paintball of ninja, and taught everything they needed to know, without the dangers of actually doing it, instructive in a way that nothing else they'd done could match, so they'd be prepared for when it actually happened. So, why don't any of our Jonin do it? The boy quietly remarked, thinking he already knew about Kakashi. This sounded too much like a prank war, where a bucket of water falling on your head could simulate a deadly trap, and that guy wouldn't have wanted his precious Uchiha to look or feel bad losing to the village troublemaker, who'd done such things to Jonin and Anbu. Whereas teaming the two boys up against Sakura would just have been sad, and not taught them anything, except, perhaps, overconfidence. Prestige, mostly. The instructor shrugged. Genin graduate from D-ranked training assignments only when their teacher feels they are ready. Saying your team is ready faster than most is a status symbol, a hint they might be geniuses. Only since virtually everyone does it anymore, it's lost the glamour and respect it once had. Now it is expected. Actually, since the graduate my team fast race has been a going tradition for so long in Konoha, most Jonin instructors don't know how to take advantage of the D-ranked training tools anymore, since their own instructors passed them early, and they did not get to learn those lessons themselves, so do not pass them on to others. When Naruto looked up, Ibisu had gone, having completed his message. Kuinai was once an academy instructor. Having different areas of specialty and emphasis than Iruka, she still had loads to teach Naruto on basic ninja subjects. And, of course, the girls could also use a refresher. They were just about to start when a pink-haired head poked in. "All right, Sakura. You may join us." Kuinai allowed. "We are going over all your old academy lessons together to reinforce our fundamental skills and make sure to catch any material you may have missed learning. If you feel that's unnecessary, you may leave at any time, but kindly don't interrupt, as there are people here who really need this material." "But what is Naruto doing here?" Sakura pointed. "These are Kunoichi lessons, right?" Kuinai treated herself to a small grin. "Naruto is a shapeshifter, and can make for a more convincing woman than you, dear. So these are important for him, probably more so than you, to whom a part comes naturally." She waited a moment, as if expecting another interruption, and when that didn't happen, the Jonin went on to begin the lesson. "As female ninja, we must not only be skilled in ninjutsu, but also possess a large amount of civilian knowledge and culture. If you cannot sneak into enemy territory and pass for a normal woman, then being a spy will be impossible. Today's lesson will be on flower arrangement. Now people, go off and pick some flowers. Sorry for the delay everyone. Life has a way of barging in." The problem with getting Teiya into the resets came chiefly from the fact that, whenever she was in town, she came in the company of Orochimaru. Thus, it fell to Naruto to come up with a plan so dastardly, so amazing. "Oi! Orochimaru! I was wondering if I could trade this Uchiha for a chance to get sweaty and intimate with Teiya here." The blonde boy dumped the well-wrapped package that was Sasuke Uchiha at the feet of what looked like the Kazekage and thumbed one of his two bodyguards. "Coo coo 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 coo." Orochimaru chuckled, while his guards looked startled. As the false face disguise melted away, revealing the snake Sanin's features below those of Tamrai's father, the legendary missing ninja chuckled arrogantly. "Tell me, how did you penetrate my disguise?" "Kabuto brags in his sleep," Naruto answered flippantly. "I think half of town knows you are coming today." They've got this really interesting trap where Tsunade and Jiraiya, the Hokage and half of Anbu are waiting for you to drop in so they can ambush you. The Snake Sanin gave a nod to his two guards and they split into four and vanished off to check into that information. Which didn't matter, as it was true. Well, the trap was easy enough to arrange, that is. While they were waiting for those bodyguards to come back with that confirmation, Naruto kicked back on his heels, sitting on the bound Uchiha, and crossed his arms casually behind his head. Hey, Orochimaru. I'm having dinner with Anko later on today. You want to come? QQQ, that sounds amusing. The Sound 4 reappeared, kneeling at the Sanin's feet. He speaks the truth, Lord Orochimaru. Your former teammates are arranged in ambush with what appears to be half of their Anbu forces. The Hokage is there, and his face is exceptionally grim. Remind me later, Kabuto must die. The Sanin quipped to his underlings, I spent a great deal of time on this trap and he's gone and outed my disguise, spoiling the whole party. Bring the boys. The Snake Sanin and his bodyguards began to rush off, heading away from Konoha and the forces prepared to meet them there. Naruto found he was slung under three arms of the spider guy, while Sasuke was laying over the shoulder of the big guy with a mohawk. You know, I don't think we've been properly introduced, Naruto observed casually, just as if he were not in the custody of his enemies. The six-armed guy opened his mouth to make a crack. You do not deserve our names. Hey. I'm not a prisoner. I'm going along willingly, and figured we could be polite about this. The group stopped, and the spider guy sprayed Naruto over every inch with golden webbing, mummifying him and binding him fast. So you aren't our prisoner? Prove it. The guy laughed. Naruto body switched out with the six-armed guy, trapping him within his own webbing, then hit him with 1,000 birds, blowing a bloody, gaping hole through his chest and killing him instantly. Sasuke's eyes went round. Naruto buffed his fingernails, and cockily declared, proof delivered. I can resist if I want to. Even Orochimaru was impressed. Performing even so basic a technique while completely immobilized was no small feat, and to body switch with another ninja was the hardest form of that trick of all. It could be done, but it put the user's skill at the technique up against the body switching skill of the one resisting it, and it was not an even comparison, as ability cancelled out ability and there still had to remain enough of an advantage on the user's side to pull off a successful switch. So it could happen, but only when the contest was greatly unequal, or when the subject of the switch was caught off guard. They could freely assume the Sound Ninja had been surprised by the jutsu, they all were, but to pull off such a switch when both bound and immobilized. That was impressive, even by Orochimaru's standards. He smiled. The one you killed was called Kidomaru. These others are Teiya, whom you seem to have heard of, Chiruba has the Uchiha, and the two-headed person behind you are the brothers Yukon and Sakan. I, as you know, am Orochimaru. Yeah, the guy who can insert himself into an opponent and manipulate cells as an assassination technique from within their own body is behind me, ready to attack. Naruto waved it off flippantly, then grinned. But it might interest you to know that my chakra is toxic, destructive even to my own body. I can recover from it. Don't count on them being able to. And that goes for the chakra-draining earth dome of the big guy, too. Interesting. Orochimaru licked his lips with a freakishly long tongue and took a step forward. Don't tell me Kabuto leaked that information, as he didn't know it. Who are you, really? Naruto grinned. They'd fallen for that lie. Sweet. Chakra was chakra and being his own, it didn't hurt him a bit. Neither did the Kyuubi's, as the seal was designed to prevent that. Really, what moron would his dad have been not to take that precaution? The boy posed. I am Naruto Uzumaki, living container for the nine-tailed demon fox, most despised person in Konoha. And I'm tired of them holding me back and sabotaging my progress. Really, the best lie was 90% truth. QQQQ Orochimaru chuckled, stepping closer again, before gesturing to Teiya. Tell me, why would you want a flat-chested tomboy like her? She's ugly and doesn't care for herself or her appearance. Her limp red hair is uninspiring and, sadly, her best feature. She has a foul mouth and curses constantly, as if completely unable to restrain herself. She is poorly mannered and crass, with no compassion for others. Why do you want her? Naruto stared the missing ninja straight in the eyes. I was hoping I could convince her to change sides, turn traitor to you, and feed me information on all of your plans so that I, a genin, could defeat you personally. Ha 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 ha. The snake Chunin broke out in a full-on belly laugh for the first time in all the while Naruto had known him. Naruto shrugged and crossed his arms behind his head, examining the sky. You want to know? Fine. My first team had a girl on it who was pink-haired, flat-chested, and the rudest thing under the sun to me. I can take a little abuse, but frankly I was looking for a chance to break her in memory of the teammate I left behind, who deserved to suffer. Fine, have her. The Chunin, greatly amused, waved Naruto over to his subordinate, whose eyes widened in shocked surprise at this announcement. Seeing via a quick glance that her leader wasn't going to defend her, the red-haired sound maiden assumed a battle stance and brought her flute up, glaring at Naruto. Don't come any closer. You aren't going to break me, you, censored, who boy is this really censored? Naruto raised a finger primly. First rule, naughty girls who use filthy words do not get any treats. Censored, like I, censored, you, censored. What, censored, is the, censored, of your, censored. Naruto turned to wince at Orochimaru. She is a foul one, isn't she? The pale Chunin just grinned. Don't you, censored, me. You, censored, of the, censored, in your ancestors, censored. The, censored, mountains of the, censored, in your, censored, homeland would, censored, the, pretty amazingly censored, your, censored, remains. Put a, censored, balloon up your, censored, dot. The blonde boy winced even worse. Yup. That's pretty foul. Censored, dot. The next thing Teiya knew, the boy had body switched for her flute. In a moment, he had her immobilized from a temporary paralysis technique shot at point-blank range. And the first thing he did was gag her, then whispered in her ear, now Teiya-chan, you are going to get something I normally reserve for people that I really like. When you decide you want more of it, recall that I like nice girls who use pretty language, and take care to look their best, okay? In response the Sound Maiden activated her cursed seal, going straight on to level 2, and overcoming the temporary paralysis with sheer chakra. Just as she reached up to pull away the gag to say something that probably ought to be censored to a very extreme degree, Naruto, who'd been waiting for this, simply reached out and removed her cursed seal. The foul-mouthed maiden collapsed in chakra shock, unable to account for the sudden surge deserting her so completely like that. As she lay helpless before him, Naruto began limbering up his fingers, calling out to the Chunin, Oi! Orochimaru! Want to learn a technique that can make any Kunoichi turn traitor to her clan and village? I'm more interested in little boys, myself. The snake Sunin stepped close and waited for the technique, just as if it was not one of his own people who was about to be sacrificed to it. Naruto shrugged. Well, then, watch and learn. Maybe you can adapt it to perform on poor little Sasuke-chan later. Agreed. The traitor nodded. Teiya's eyes went round as Naruto's hands descended. Half an hour later, after the girl's voice had recovered from shouting herself hoarse over begging to be allowed the joy and privilege of being his love slave and other, less appropriate, comments that were naughty even in context, the snake Sunin looked up from the struggling and disgusted Uchiha to ask Naruto, how did this part go again? The demon container shrugged nonchalantly. Don't know. Something seems to be lost in the conversion. Don't ask me, I'm an expert on girls. Little boys are outside my interest. Oh, I'm sure I'll get it right in time. Orochimaru leered. Now show me again on the girl. What would Daddy say if he knew I was instructing pedophiles? Naruto shook his head sadly, before wriggling his warm fingers in Teiya's direction, politely not mentioning that this jutsu trade was strictly one way, as he'd get to keep the girl, but Orochimaru would forget this conversation ever happened over the next reset. Good job. Orochimaru guessed. Yes, that's probably it, the boy agreed, just to be agreeable and not start a fight in this situation. Yes, master. I'll be good, Teiya muttered, exhilarated yet exhausted, eyes alight in eagerness as his hands descended. No naughty words, not one. Ooh. As Naruto worked away, he asked the Sunin conversationally, so, what would you teach me in return for showing you how to remove those cursed seals of yours? Orochimaru grinned. Oh. I was planning to kill you to keep that knowledge from spreading. Yes, I know, the boy shrugged nonchalantly. But think on it this way, there might be others who know the technique, in fact I can guarantee you there are, so you might need to know how to do it yourself so you can develop a next version of the thing that isn't subject to our counter. Orochimaru licked his lips. How about I let you live? I wouldn't want you to make a promise you couldn't keep, Naruto quipped, then shrugged, going back to his work on Teiya, who quivered bonelessly, too far gone to scream out his name. No, all I expect is a few weeks of passion and pleasure out of my little Teiya-chan here before you determine that you'd rather see the Kyuubi moved to some other container. But I would like to learn a few jutsu in the meantime, just to spite those idiots in Konoha who never taught me any. The Sunin paused, as if considering. Naruto shrugged, completely unconcerned, even as he drew in a copy of this Teiya's memories. Or you can just kill me, but that significantly lowers the odds of you ever learn how they are beating your unbeatable cursed seal. The pale freak grinned toothily. You amuse me, boy. Thanks. I think Naruto blinked, questioning that statement and somehow feeling dirtied by it. Orochimaru brought a hand up to caress the boy's shoulder, only for it to be stopped short, sealed in a short wall of earth. No touching. The boy interested in disgusting old men is over there, the demon container pointed out Sasuke's bound form. Enraged, the pale man pulled back, smashing apart Naruto's wall even as he freed his hand. With a nasty grin, the snake Sunin formed hand seals, and gloated, "Goodbye, boy." The Sunin's mouth stretched impossibly wide, and a serpent about as big around as Choji's middle began to slither out of the opening. Temporary paralysis, Naruto stated in a bored tone, not even bothering to form a hand seal, and saying the technique's name only out of politeness. The snake dropped as if dead, stuck half in and half out of Orochimaru's mouth, whose expression switched to one of comical surprise. With a snake bigger around than his waist half in and half out of his mouth, the Chunin was pretty helpless. Efforts to pull the sleeping serpent out with his arms proved human-sized limbs were too small for the task, and the situation was downright funny as the Chunin struggled to free himself. In the end it was the big guy with the mohawk who pulled the serpent out, and even he had to switch on his cursed seal to get the power to do so. Snakes that big are heavy, and it was stuck in what was, for it, a small opening. Wow. That was pathetic. Naruto deigned to notice the Chunin's struggles just as he freed himself. Cheekily, he asked, "So, can you eat people too?" In response, Orochimaru's tongue angrily snaked out, caught him up, and ate him, swallowing the blonde genin whole, only to explode in thousands of Naruto a moment later, the boy emerging from the Chunin's ruins carrying with him the snake Chunin's sword, and a scroll he'd found inside. The Orange Army turned to face the remaining two of the Sound Four, and grinned cheekily. "Now I think you should ask yourselves one question," they chorused. "Do I want to fight thousands of the guy who has already casually killed my boss, killed one teammate and taken another out of action?" Teiya moaned in a puddle of girly pleasure at his feet. Jiruba and the merged brothers broke and ran. The boy chortled, hands perched cockily on his hips. "I wasn't expecting that to go as well as it did. I'll have to remember this pattern for use again later. I may have to do this often, for a while." "Oi! Teiya! Get up! I'm going to go introduce you to our clan. You'll have friends and sisters there, if you are willing to be a friend and sister to them in turn." He helped the young lady to regain her feet, and started the march back to Konoha. "We've got to get you ready for getting yourself out of this mess. I can't be expected to rescue you from the snake freak every time, you know. One of the first things you'll want to do is learn how to remove the curse seal. Here, it goes like this." It came as no surprise to anyone that the information the Kyuubi imparted as to how to bring more people into the resets spawned a great deal of excitement and debate. However, it also had some rather unexpected reversals. "I want to bring Guy into the resets." "No way. I want to be the one to bring Guy into them." "Okay. I don't care which of you two gets Guy. I want to bring Lee in." "Hey. No fair. I wanted to bring in Lee." Yugao turned away from where the younger girls were arguing over who got the privilege of bringing in the clan's two most favorite allies. No sooner had the information become available than Yugao had tried to go bring in Hayate Gecko. But that had failed miserably. It seemed that what the Kyuubi had taught was true. Since Yugao was a claimed mate of Naruto's, she was unable to create a shelter in her mind for someone else she might love in a mate-like fashion. Since she had once nearly loved Hayate that way, she found that an absolute barrier in her mind toward accepting him. The mere possibility that romantic feelings could exist for her former boyfriend again had prevented her from bringing the former flame into her mind. Her foxy nature prevented it. Tsunade had also experienced failure, not once but twice on her attempts at this. Her first attempt was to try and bring in the Hokage, as he was the key factor to so much of this. Getting him in would have been a great triumph. But no such luck. The legendary slug Chunin hadn't wanted to divulge details, but apparently the absolute trust required was lacking between them. There were too many hard memories of Sarutobi having favored Orochimaru, and she'd never liked the kind of choices the office of Hokage made one do. That, as well as some bad history she didn't want to get into, and she confessed that she just did not trust the old man as much as was apparently required. Then Tsunade had tried going after her old teammate Jiraiya, but again, bad memories from their shared youth prevented her. Well, that, and also the fact that he was an openly flaming pervert, something that, by default, made it impossible for pure women to like or trust him. Which, that last pretty much nuked any chance for any member of Naruto's clan to trust the Toad Sannin. The same extended to Kakashi, and not only was he a pervert, but each and every member of Naruto's extended family had learned to despise the Jonin for his lack of teaching methods, his blatant favoritism, and his complete inability to be fair to his students. There was no trust possible there, not when you knew something like that about a person. It also got suggested that Kuinai bring in Asuma, but she reported inability for most of the same reasons, not to nearly the same extent as with those others, but she still knew him to be a failure in important areas, so trusting him absolutely was next to impossible. Even Ino reported that she couldn't trust her Jonin teacher to that level. He sat around playing shogi with Shikamaru all day instead of training them, and then thrust them, unprepared, out into danger in the Chunin tests. No, she couldn't report that she had the trust required to bring him in. He'd exposed her to danger she'd been totally unprepared for, apparently unconcerned for the consequences. That did not build trust. This was turning out to be more awkward than anyone had supposed. I want Lee. No. I get Lee. Guy-sensei. Lee. Guy-sensei. That's it guys, hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel if you want more videos like this. Also tell me in the comment section down below if you have any recommendation about what I should make next. Thanks for watching.